The chain of command in the event of a hijacking calls for the President to empower the Secretary of Defense to send up military aircraft and, if necessary, give an order to shoot down the plane.
The point is, he had the sole ability to order the shoot down of the planes, and the Otis Air Force Base pilots, Duffy and Nash, said we didn't have the authority, and even if they had gotten there in time, without that authority from the President, so the POTUS is out of the loop.
I had a huge issue with the leadership that day, okay? It was really hard for me to understand that the President was unaware and at a school, that Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, was at his desk until the Pentagon was hit.
The Secret Service has an arrangement with the FAA. They'd had open lines after the World Trade Center was
tracking it by radar.
Supposedly at 8:46, the FAA set up a phone bridge with the Secret Service, with NORAD.
Well, if the FAA opened a phone link after the first tower was hit, they would have known that it wasn't a little plane. Then it wasn't an accident.
Simultaneously, the pagers of his aides erupt in a cacophony of beeps and tones.
He goes into the school. Carl Rove and I and some others were standing there and informed him of this, in which he, being a former pilot, had kind of the same reaction going, was it bad weather? And we said, no, apparently not.
The President was surprised. He thought it had to be an accident.
With the Secret Service in on that at 8:46 in the morning, they would have also, by standard protocol and procedure, had to have told the National Security Advisor, who was also, you know, is also there in protection of the President. She is to inform him of all national security threats.
The President ducks into an empty classroom and calls National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice back in Washington.
He said, it sounds like a terrible accident, keep me informed.
It, again, seems impossible that she was not aware of the terrorist attacks, the fact that these were hijacked planes. These were not errant planes or pilot error.
At that same moment, 3 blocks from the White House at the St. Regis Hotel, 2 old friends meet for breakfast at a window table. George Tenet is the Director of Central Intelligence. His companion this morning is David Boren, the former chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
And out of the corner of my eye, I could see several people converging on our table. And I remember one of them said to George Tenet, Mr. Director, the World Trade Tower has just been attacked by an airplane. I was struck by the fact he used the word attacked.
His instincts are to think this is not an accident, but nobody knows, and it's a very cautious internal White House reaction.
Well, first of all, if he knew that the first tower was hit and then still went into the classroom and sat there, that's outrageous. At 8:46, they would have known that something serious was going on and should have responded immediately. At the second tower, where my husband was hit at 9:02. That is plenty of time to send out a warning and get the people out. And that is plenty of time to send up an intercept. And why that was not done, if they were all on this phone bridge and everybody knew what was going on, is beyond me. Why Bush continued to go to the classroom and put the kids at risk is beyond me.
Chief of Staff Andrew Card approaches from his right, leans down, and says the following words: "A second plane has hit the second tower." And with those words, the President now understands the war on terrorism has begun.
The country was clearly under attack. I mean, I was petrified
The commander-in-chief, let's put a commander, as soon as he heard 906, the nation's under attack, we know that there were Marines and Secret Service people going, are we ready to go?
He's in Sarasota, Florida.
And I know, but I mean, he could have made it to Air Force One if he was going to do a press conference to reassure the nation. He could have done it aboard the plane.
But the president remained in the classroom for at least 5 more minutes.
10 more, actually. In the classroom, and then he stayed in the school in which he prepared a press statement, and they actually did a press conference from the school.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Now, keep in mind that at this point, as many as 11 planes, there was a suspect that were hijacked. They have no idea where these other planes are going. The president is a highly visible target.
At the same time, Vice President Cheney, at the White House, watched on television as a second plane struck the World Trade Center.
Watching developments on television, and as we started to get organized to figure out what to do, my Secret Service agents came in, and they, under these circumstances, they just move. They don't say, sir, or ask politely. They came in and said, sir, we have to leave immediately.
He claims to have only heard the attacks at 9:30 when the Secret Service came in and said that the nation's under attack and that he had to be put in someplace safe.
And when it entered the danger zone, it looked like it was headed for the White House, was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement.
And yet there are photographer accounts and Richard Clark's account that, in fact, Vice President Cheney was informed around 9 o'clock. Why didn't Vice President Cheney then ensure that the right steps were being taken by the Department of Defense?
I'd like to ask Victoria if you were you working with Secretary Rumsfeld at the time?
Yes.
Okay, now there are 2 stories about Secretary Rumsfeld.
We find that, according to his accounts, that he was unaware of the attacks until the Pentagon got hit. And then apparently he rushes out to help victims of the attack.
Richard Clark, in his book, Against All Enemies, says that a teleconferencing session was set up at the White House at about 9:10. Present in this teleconference were the CIA director, the FBI director, Secretary Rumsfeld, Condi Rice, Richard Armitage representing Colin Powell.
Here we have 2 totally different accounts. This is not a partisanship issue. This is something that if you pulled the tape, we could have nailed the facts right then and there, who was there and who was not there.
So where was he?
Where was the SecDef?
First thing that morning, as a matter of fact, he was meeting with members of Congress. He was having breakfast with meetings with members of Congress. And what he was talking about was the world in which we found ourselves has changed dramatically. And it was much less likely that we were going to face armies and navies and air forces going forward.
Tori, was he a part of the teleconference or not?
Let me finish. He was having a conversation with them about exactly the fact that the world had changed and we hadn't changed with it.
So
now let me tell you what happened that morning.
We have to do it quickly.
He was meeting with the members of Congress when the planes hit the World Trade Center. The communications center immediately starts spinning up. He was part of it. I was in another part of the building when the plane hit the Pentagon. He goes to his outer office and says, what was it? Immediately, people didn't know. So his instincts, which are very good, said, find out exactly what happened.
Among those helping the wounded and injured is the 69-year-old Rumsfeld himself. The Secretary of Defense is outside the burning building, while inside the Pentagon.
For 30 minutes, we couldn't find him. And just as we began to worry, he walked into the door of the National Military Command Center.
Fair enough, but why didn't he go to the war room? He's the Secretary of Defense. Why didn't he go into the war room and take command in the Pentagon? He didn't show up for over an hour and a half after the first plane was hijacked. Why? The Secretary of Defense.
And the reason why I feel that it's important is because I want to make sure that people who are supposed to inform my leadership are doing their jobs. I want to make sure that everybody knows what the protocol is so that in an emergency, we don't have an hour of people doing nothing.